Okay, so I mentioned at the start of today's proceedings for you all, here in the room or online, that we had 4 steps. Ladies and gentlemen, could I quieten you down, please? We've got 2 more remaining steps to do, 1 medium, 1 short. In a moment, I'm going to convene our second panel, bringing in the wider stakeholder perspective on a market design fit for net zero. And then I'll bring up Kristian, that we heard from at the start from Eurelectric, giving his General Secretary's perspective just to wrap up things and send you all off very punctually at 5:30 today. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, I do believe in a moment a QR code is going to appear on our screen. Wonderful. If you were to scan this, you'll have real-time access to all of the photographs being taken in the room, which those of you that may want to use those in real time or later to tweet or for other purposes, that allows you to access them. So whether you're online or in the room, just take a moment and capture that QR code if you need to. Great. Now in a moment, I'm going to call up our second panel, getting the stakeholder perspectives on what they'd like to see from the market design. But before we do that, I want to go into 2 poll questions for you, our audience, just to get your perspectives, like we did last time, as a means for us to share that with our panel so they can bear that in mind also in our discussions that follow. So can we bring up our first poll question, please? Great. As you can see on the screen, out of the long-term contracting opportunities, which one, or possibly ones, do you think will bring the most cost-efficient deployment of renewable and low-carbon technologies that we clearly need to reach net zero? PPAs, voluntary 2-sided CFDs that we touched upon earlier, forward contracts with the right level of liquidity, or a combination of all of the above? Unsurprisingly, in one way for me, I think the combination approach of all of the above is a clear standout here. I think that correlates well with what we heard before. But I note particularly a 3-way split almost between the PPAs, the forward contracts, and the voluntary 2-sided CFDs as well. Something for our panelists to note as we move forward. Right, let's keep time in mind and move on rapidly to our second question, please. Investments in energy infrastructure needed to enable a more sustainable and secure energy system. The Commission proposal adequately addresses the issue of grid investments, doesn't adequately address the issue. We still need more solutions to get that right. Or 3, it's not an issue because the current framework is more than adequate. So again, take a little short time there to get your views across on that. And that's something our panelists can keep in their minds as we move forward. That more or less there, a clear picture emerges. I think the consensus is very broadly on the lines, as we can see here, that we don't yet adequately address the issue and more is still needed. I'll be very interested to hear what our panel thinks on that as we move forward, and also questions that may come again from our audience. For clarity, everyone, as I did last time, I'll try and make time for you as an audience to bring in some of your questions to our speakers in the second stage of our debate as well. So with time in mind and with purpose in mind, let me bring up to the stage our speakers, please. Could you welcome them with a round of applause? from my left and your right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Walburga Hemetsberger, the CEO of Solar Power Europe, bringing the Renewable Developers perspective. The TSO perspectives coming from Sonya Twohig, the Secretary General of ENSO-E. The industrial consumer perspective represented by Guillaume de Goÿs, the CEO of Aluminium Dunkerque. And last but by no means least, the energy traders perspective and more, coming from Mark Copley, the CEO of EFET. So can you give them one more quick round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? A little bit like our last panel, I'm going to pose a couple of quick-fire questions to each of our speakers in turn. Then I'll open up for their reflections and then straight to you, our audience, for your questions. So if you've got questions coming, keep them in your mind, and I'll do my very best to make sure we cover as many as possible. Same rules of operation as before. I won't have time for long statements from the floor. I will take the occasional double question, but I'll take them one at a time, and I might not use your second one. Okay. So, Walburga, over to you then without further ado. From a solar perspective, what have you got to bring for the decarbonisation objectives? As a sector, obviously, we've heard a lot about the need for more renewables. And in simple terms, what can solar bring to that?
That's an easy question and very quickly to answer. So we just need to build solar faster. We're doing that right at the moment, and I've brought a picture, and I'm sorry, probably for those online it's better to see, but it should be very visual. So we built 41 gigawatt of solar last year. So that's a small point here, but that's still the capacity of, if you want to compare it, of 41 nuclear power plants. We will be here in 2026. That's more than doubling these 41 gigawatts. In between is around about 60 gigawatts. That's what the IEA asks us to deliver in order to keep our homes warm next winter. 60 gigawatt. That is our forecast for this year and next year. And 2030, we are supposed to be at 1 terawatt. Round about 30% of the electricity consumption by then, and I think there's no question, and we've all seen the last IPCC report, that by 2040 we have to be largely electric and largely decarbonized, and that's renewable, so we will grow faster also beyond. That's the one thing, and then other than that, other than growing, the second thing is we need to make sure that we cooperate with the grid operators in order to make sure that we can integrate renewables, cooperate with member states to go faster on permitting and do a lot of other things, still jobs. We need to convey the message that it's sexy to work in our sector. We need 1.5 million jobs. So that's what we need to do and where we need to contribute to. But this is how we can reach the decarbonization.
Got you, so very clear. I've heard 1 terawatt by 2030 described as ambitious, I've heard it described as achievable, and I've heard it described as achievable if. So let me pick up that if part of the discussion. So what do you need from the market design proposal to make that if a will or does, the 1 terawatt by 2030? What's your view on the current market design proposal? And what else does it need?
So first of all, to start with, I do think that the European Commission has done an amazing job. I understood that the previous panel was talking about glass half full or half empty.
It was mentioned by some that the glass is definitely half full with potential to be filled more.
So I would think it's 80% full from the proposals we've seen. What do we think of it? So another visual, I'm sorry, this is our powerhouse. I hope you can see it. And what the market design proposal does is ticking the boxes of the fundamentals. That's regulatory stability, which we do think is very well, is very well shown in this proposal. And what it does is also ticking the box or some of the boxes when it comes to the roof, and that is a future-proof grid. That's up here. In between, there's a couple of other things still, permitting, secure, reliable supply chains, and we need workers. But it's already ticking 2 of the 5 boxes. And maybe to answer your question in three points. First, it does exactly, it preserves the market. That's fundamental. It's not the time to mess around with market fundamentals, so it does preserve the market fundamentals. Very important, making it sure that there is many routes to market. There was at some point a little bit of a fear that it would be CFDs only, so there's many routes to the markets, and that's preserved. And also it provides some possibilities to go into PPAs much more for other groups, for consumers, for smaller companies, not just the big techs. So this is good. That's the first point. For us, a game changer is another proposal, another point in that proposal, which is energy sharing. So energy sharing will be made much more easy. And that is democratizing energy, basically. It's completely transformational, because what it does is that you can share, you can put a lot of solar, much more than you need on your roof, and you can share it with your neighbors. One very nice example where this is happening already is in Portugal. That's a stadium. Please, I can't remember the name, and I was told it's not a major football, team, but a stadium which is using all its roof to produce solar, and is sharing it with the families which are living in 4 kilometers around that stadium. They are seeing their energy bills reduced. They pay maximum 70% of what they used to pay. And the energy bill of that stadium is reduced by 45%. So a very nice thing.
A practical example of that energy sharing idea actually being implemented already.
Yeah, so energy sharing, very, very important proposal. And then the last one is all the different ideas around grids, around flexibility, having, for example, national storage targets. Fantastic. We need to build up capacity. We need to build up storage capacity. Then also on grids, that the investment will be possible in OPEX, that there's new ways of thinking about grid investment, and that there is also more transparency on where projects can be developed. Fortunately, that very best practice example of France has been taken up, that there's more transparency about where the grid can still integrate renewables, and that will now also be implemented. So a couple of very nice things which we see in that proposal. To be further discussed, there's some details which need to be further discussed, but more generally, we're very, very happy.
Okay, noted. So a very positive tone, I think, from the solar side then. Very happy with what you see and what it can bring. And I note the word transformational there as well. Okay, Sonya, I'll move on to you. I think many in the room, and probably virtually as well, know that ENTSO-E's already published its vision for a power system. And my first question really is a little bit broadly in that area. How does the market design proposal we now have on the table, to what degree does it correlate with ENTSO-E's vision for a power system?
Thank you, David. And good afternoon to you all. So I guess the power system vision is essentially got 4 pillars, and I guess the market design proposals touch on each element. So I'm very much, and I'm sitting on a stool, so I'm at the bar, and I'm saying the glass is half full, so I'm very happy having my drink right now. I'm also waiting for the next drink, because I'm Irish, so I always have more than one. So those who are Irish in the room always have more than one. So the point is that I would like a bit more than what we got.
Can I ask which particular style and flavour of beverage would you like in the glass?
No, because it probably won't be Irish. But so the point is that, you know, we could look at it quite critically, of course, and we should also somewhat critically assess what's proposed, because, of course, the consequences of not getting it right are quite enormous. So I think we're all quite relieved that the proposals are indeed not overly detrimental to the system. What we would like, of course, is a more impact assessment to be conducted. And to be fair to Commission, they did not have time to do so.
I was going to say, because something that came up in our previous discussions, and I think we're all very aware of, is the time urgency here. Walburga's mentioned from a solar perspective alone, you know, if those developments of market design are not in place, that 1 terawatt growth is just not going to happen. It won't be able to. So you're talking here about the need for deeper investigation into the effects of certain choices in market design, yet the trade-off to that, of course, is time is short. So how do you see that being bridged?
Well, I think you have to do it with the industry, don't you? I mean, you cannot move fast unless you bring everybody with you. That's just the learnings of the last 10, 20, 30 years of integrated markets, right? So I think the industry here today has a lot of alignments, you know, so therefore that's a very good basis to move forward. And of course, NSOE and TSOs are very, very interested in how we move forward now. So indeed, in terms of a number of areas such as intraday gate closure, we would like more assessment to be done of that, because indeed some markets, some areas of Europe may not necessitate that. There could be huge investment for not so much benefit, maybe even not so the opposite effect. For capacity mechanisms, we feel there needs to be more simplification there. Again, with the last 12 months that we've had on adequacy, security of supply concerns, a lot of ministries have taken steps to intervene. Very emergency measures have been taken. What is our learning from that? You know, that's my question. So NSOE wants to play its part. We have a European Resource Adequacy Assessment tool. We want to look at potentially widening the scope of that. But I think just back to what we think is really good. We, of course, in our vision, proposed flexibility needs to be assessed. And so we has a number of tools that assess adequacy, resourcing, the network plans, the flexibility area. While it was not unknown to us, it wasn't yet identified as an area of focus that a dynamic system with lots of solar, with lots of renewables, with an intermittent generation source, it requires flexibility services now. So we are very supportive of that initiative, and we're very supportive to try to make it more European level assessment rather than national. We feel it's more of a European assessment that would be worthwhile. But of course, in conjunction with national jurisdictions and ministries. But as I said, you know, we do feel that there's a lot to work with this proposal. And it's also just a case of maybe we should learn the fact that this type of power system now that we have in Europe necessitates this type of review often, even if it just confirms what we believe is the right approach. Because it is necessary for the industry to be supportive of such a market design. But it is also important to realize that it needs the tweaking, it needs the emphasis. Did we think we would have the electricity prices we've seen in the last 12 months? Did we think that the huge push on the retail and the pressure on the consumers would be as it was? No. So market forces, political forces are all driving this electricity design, and we have to be all together discussing this on a more regular basis. Yeah.
And noted, we heard in our earlier discussions today in framing things, and also in our first panel, an emphasis on this idea that there's a broad consensus, I think, we need an evolution rather than some fundamental revolution of the energy market, echoing what you've said there, or linking with what you've said there as well. But one of the things that did come up very much was this time pressure and this difficulty. I do reflect myself, though, for the room as well, and our virtual audience. We talk about evolution, not revolution, but I've heard from you that we need constant evolution. Because it is a little concern for me in a way, once the market design proposal is done quickly, how much scope will there be for the necessary adjustments to deal with some of those unforeseens that may come up, due also to the lack of extensive impact assessment, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's a sustainable market design is what's needed, right? So you don't need to go in and tweak it all the time, but you need to be able to assess what parameters are actually the major driving force in any, in any set of conditions. But also when you look at the grid investment question, that's not easy. That's not straightforward. That takes a lot of money. It takes permitting, and we know that in jurisdictions that there is a lot of opposition. We're looking at offshore investments, spring coming onshore. So the question there is that agile? So we do need to get in the room with all those players to ask ourselves the question of how do we move quicker on grid investments, but also on the overall incentivization of regulation here. I think this is an area that the design could be further enhanced with, is the regulatory model question. Do we have the right regulatory model for the type of power system that we have in Europe?
Okay. Duly noted, and an open question. So Guillaume, coming on to you then, looking a little bit from the industrial consumer point of view. We've heard a lot today about the important pillar of consumers There's been a strong emphasis on domestic consumers and households, but of course, clearly in the mix is the industrial consumer too. So from the Aluminium Dunkerque perspective, obviously where you're CEO, a couple of questions related, one particular question related to that. I know from my contact with the metal sector that I have, disclaimer to our audience, that obviously aluminium's been heavily affected by these spiking energy prices over the last year and more as a consequence of the war in Ukraine and more. What do you expect from the market design proposal that we now have in trilogue to help your industry and support your industry as an industry made in Europe in terms of dealing with these challenges of energy prices, both now and moving forward into the future?
Yeah. First, I really want to say hi to everyone and to thank you for inviting me. And I'm generally an optimistic guy. And just like Sonya, I like to drink some good glasses of wine, for example, with my friends. And the half-empty glass, and then I will be more optimistic, is the fact that I lost, in the last 18 months, I lost half of my friends. They just disappear because of those high prices. And half of the aluminum production in the European Union has been stopped because of that crisis. And that's sad. That's sad because aluminum, just like silicon, just like some other non-base metal, are absolutely necessary for the transition that we are
Indeed,
discussing.
I would ask Walburga, how many solar panels can you make without aluminium?
And that's the same for the
No, indeed,
transmission
we need
line.
aluminium. Yeah.
So that was the a bit pessimistic view. What do we expect from that market design evolution is really to have more visibility over long term. That's very important because when you are struggling with a very short-term concern, stoppage, curtailment, etc., you can't invest. You can't invest in decarbonation. You can't invest in capacity. So really, really, the first thing that we need is to have visibility. And some of the proposal, PPAs, CFDs, are providing us with that absolutely necessary visibility. So that's the first point. The second one, which is important for us, as we will have that visibility, which is much needed, we can invest in decarbonation. Big investments are ahead of us, and we need your support to provide us with low carbon electricity that will help us to invest in decarbonation of our processes. Second, the third point, we can also help you, not just by providing you the base metal that you need, but also on the flexibility. We are already participating to several flexibility tools, and we need to increase our participation to those flexibility tools. Could be peak shaving, fast and primary reserves, etc. We are already doing that, but we can also invest in our process so we can have energy flexibility over longer term. And we need some investment to do that, so we need absolutely to have that visibility.
Okay, noted. And last but not least, Mark, I'm going to come on to you. So from the EFET point of view, a couple of questions. From the energy traders' perspective, how do you view the market design proposal for efficient market design and integration? How do you view it? We've heard glass very full, we've heard glass half full, we've heard glass of wine or glass of something else half full. What's your take on it? And if there's anything missing for you, priority-wise, what would it be?
Thanks very much, and hello everyone. Appreciate you staying. Look, I could give you a really long and really detailed answer here.
Which you promised me you wouldn't.
Which I promised I wouldn't. Yeah. So I want to start on a slightly different angle. And maybe what we need here is a really clear recognition of the value and frankly the necessity of a European market in delivering decarbonisation, security of supply, and making sure costs are as low as possible. Because obviously you need to see the visibility in the forward curve if you're an investor, but you also have to believe the politicians aren't going to intervene in your market and undermine your investment case. Now, Kristian, looking tired in the front row for very good reason, did a piece of work the other day that said there were 439 policy responses to the energy crisis in 18 months. This is in the single energy market. 439. Now, they all had good reasons. I'm sure they were sensible. But if this is a European market, we have to start acting like it's a European market, and we need policymakers and politicians to support that view, because otherwise, when the next crisis comes, the best market design in the world will not work, because there will be a political reaction and this debate will repeat. So the second thing we need is a realism about what market design can do. It's really only about how your price is calculated, when it's calculated. You know, it's more or less who, what, where, why, when. But we keep thinking that this thing called market design is going to solve all our problems. Sonya's right. This is a debate that needs to keep continuing. It's a debate that needs to be based around stakeholders getting together and assessing what works and what doesn't. So look, you then asked me about integrity first. Now, I'm quite a fan of the remit framework we've got. I think it's all right. I think there is more we can do to make some of the ACER guidance binding. I don't want to see two regulators regulating conduct in the market. And I think we need to be, a little bit careful about putting in place lots and lots of regulation.
If I could just clarify, Mark, why specifically do you feel that two regulators hopefully working well in tandem is problematic?
So we're going to get into deeply into the territory I didn't want to get into here, but look.
Let's go short version then. Okay.
You've got ACER responsible for physical markets and ESMA responsible for financial markets, and there's extremely detailed rules applying to both. They recently signed a memorandum of understanding, which I'm a big fan of, but when you read that very significant proposal, what you see there is a set of proposals which could, in the mind of my members, create a confusion about who's doing what, and that's never a situation you want to be in.
You're talking here about a tangible risk for you of unnecessary complication.
Indeed, that's the worry, and Juan Jose summed this up perhaps better than I did. So look, there's a bit to be done on integrity, but I think the basics are strong. You then asked about efficient integration. Day ahead and intraday are pretty good. There is more we can do on intraday, even if Sonya wants to disagree with me there. We can do a lot more on balancing, which is fragmented, but I'm with most people in the room that forwards is where we need to focus. But let's not just look at forwards, because we love talking about whole system views. We haven't really got one in Europe. We're not really thinking about retail markets very much at all. I mean, there's a bit of conversation, but it's pretty immature. A huge proportion of the bill is network tariffs. They are a mess. We really need to be starting to think about what our network tariffs are there for. And if I'm going to be controversial, isn't the governance of this sector a complete nightmare? 800 DSOs, 40 TSOs, who's in charge? I mean, and we could also extend that to some of the regulators. So if we really want to have a think, there's some bigger questions to challenge. They're not the questions for today, and this proposal is good in dealing with the crisis we face. But let's not lose sight of the fact there are some real questions to answer. That went way over my time, and I'm sure my members are going to kill me for some of that, but there we go. It's at least food for thought, isn't it?
I find this last slot of the day tends to bring a wonderful degree of honesty from our speakers. Good stuff. Right, with that in mind then, any quick reflections, what we've heard, speakers, from comments you've heard from others? Walburga, I see you nodding, please do come in.
Maybe to comment on what you just said, we also truly believe we need a roadmap for further grid investments, grid management, grid, you name it, especially on the DSO level. So I do think that's the next big step the Commission has to take and where we all have to work together. So I would fully agree. Maybe one other comment on what you said on flexibility and the possibilities it provides for your business. I was attending an Elia event this week where there was a big zinc producer, and I guess it's a little bit similar, I don't know.
it's similar.
Yeah, so they were saying with flexibility, participating in a flexibility scheme, they saved 25% of their costs. So it's not just about, the contribution to the energy system, but I think it also contributes big times to competitiveness.
Okay, anything else to bring in before I open up to the room? At this stage, no. Any questions here pending in the room?
Sorry, David, can I just say a couple of things?
Mark.
There's just a couple of things I want to pick up from what I've heard during the debate today, which I've enjoyed. So look, the first thing is we keep talking about long-term contracts. Can we remember someone has to take the risk on a long-term contract? There has to be a counterparty. And, I don't think making the state the counterparty to every contract is a particularly sustainable solution. So I think we really need to be asking ourselves, why would someone want to take that counterparty risk in this market? That's the first one. Second thing, obvious point, not every customer's the same. Not every person has the same preferences. So we've really got to make sure that this market is letting people make informed decisions, not treating everyone in the same way. And the third thing is, that poll question in a way frustrated me a bit, because this is not about choosing CFDs or PPAs. It's about sitting down and working out how those different measures interact. And each of them have pros and each of them have cons and each of them have knock-on effects on the others. And I sincerely hope we can have extremely smart CFDs and whatever else. But the design challenge in those long-term contracts to stop them cannibalizing each other is huge. And that needs to be a really targeted measure involving the industry.
Noted on that, Mark, but I would ask a little bit of a half follow-up question on that. I think our poll showed me that everybody, a vast majority of people see that it's not about picking one horse, but it's about that blended approach. But your point is noted that that blending has to be done very carefully, perhaps, to avoid them cannibalizing each other in a negative or a detrimental way. Right, any last reflections, please, Guillaume?
Yeah, on what you just said, just want to give you two examples. On PPAs, we have, as industrial consumer, we have the ability to provide this counterparty. Just to give you an example, the largest PPA counterparty is currently in Spain. That's an aluminium company, by far. Second topic, and that has been mentioned by Fabien Roch in the previous session, consortium. We have some example of very good consortium which are working and providing with security for those long-term PPAs. So I really think that the current proposal, if we use it properly, are an answer or a partial answer to what we want to do, decarbonizing Europe.
That makes me incredibly happy. I'm the only one who hasn't done a drink analogy, so let's have one, because the fact we've got a large customer saying we're providing flexibility, we're responding to market prices. The fact we've got someone saying we can be the counterpart to this makes me incredibly happy as someone who thinks the market is a really, really good solution to decarbonization.
So could I summarize, Mark, your glass is overflowing or it's quite full?
I mean, I'm extremely pleased by this reaction, because a lot of the time you get, we couldn't possibly respond to the market price, this is all too complicated. And the fact I've got, a gentleman to my right who knows more about this than I do, saying we can find opportunity in this, that is a wonderful message for a believer in market-based decarbonization, right?
Good stuff. Oh, nice positive message to come out. Right, we've got a few minutes left, but we want to use them wisely, ladies and gentlemen. We got any pending questions in the room? Anything specific or burning question anybody wants to ask? Or can I now carefully bring the panel to its conclusion? As a true European, I take silence as agreement. Not always very democratic, but I'll do it. In which case, I come back to my panel for some wrap-up comments. So my question, or our theme really is, what are your stakeholder perspectives on what you want from market design? Let me reframe that. How do you view the current proposal? In one sentence, probably drink analogies again. And what is the priority, one or two things you think we still need to really focus on, and the co-legislators really need to focus on right now? So Walburga, you first. I'll go in the order we did. So Walburga, Sonya, Guillaume, and then Mark, please.
I stay with my 80% glass full, so
Yep.
what we still need to see probably is a little bit more details on how to incentivize the take-up of flexibility. So it's relatively vague still what, how flexibility can contribute to capacity remuneration
So
mechanisms.
you're looking for a much higher level of clarity on that.
But what we're looking at is more clarity, because we do think huge capacities of flexibility, whether that's storage or other flexibilities, need to be built up. And we see good points in the proposal. But there still needs to be a little bit more clarity, because we need to go fast building up these flexibilities. So that would be my wish for digging deeper into, to really make it clear how to build up these capacities.
Okay, duly noted.
I guess the point is that when you look at what we've come through in the last 12 months, if not longer, because it started before the war in Ukraine, right? We have come through, so there's a resilience now that you can say, I wasn't sure, would we take this shock, and we have. What would be very helpful, though, in the future is that we ask ourselves how we prevent, some of the shocks to those who have less choices. Be it the industry in terms of, high-end industry, or be it the consumer. There's a lot of people who have become disadvantaged because of what happened. So for some, we cannot say they've come through, like as you say yourself.
No, duly
Guillaume.
noted. So you're calling it, from what I understand then, for some really targeted resilience building
Yes,
where
I
it's
don't
needed.
know if this proposal gives targeted resilience, and that's why I ask, does it address the real risk that we have seen now, or the issue that we have seen, and the risks that could further be? So I think it needs to be tested, that question, amongst all of us, right? So, but I think what's really important on the timing question is that we do actually not waste time by squabbling over what is the perfect market design, or what's the perfect CFD, and I do feel that the industry, as I said, is much more coalesced on that point, and I think we all agree we don't need to have time for that. So there's a very lot of positivity in the room about being constructive about that change aspect, and I agree with Walburga about the detail and so on. But I asked the industry to work with us, and so we in particular, who will write the flexibility needs assessment methodology. We're also developing the demand side network code, again with the industry and the DSO entity. So there's a lot of very positive developments. What's really needed now is just that real sustainable design aspect. Is it there for the future, or just for a certain set of parameters that could change? And I think we need to be clever here. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll just add one point that has been mentioned, but just want to emphasize that while the current proposal is providing a common framework, which is absolutely necessary if we want to continue to integrate our market, we need to recognize that there are some specificities among the member states, and by providing some optionality, I'm sure you will like that, to the member state, that will allow everyone to have the proper tools. Could be CFDs, could be PPAs, could be cross-border PPAs. That is absolutely necessary to give us sufficient visibility, as I said.
Yeah, we've heard comments related to risk already today about the danger of trying very much a one-size-fits-all approach. On the one side, definitely a European approach is required, but there's a tangible risk involved in trying to fit one shape onto everybody in the same way, and rapidly too, perhaps. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. And Mark, coming to you, just to bring together your final comments briefly.
Thanks. Look, the market's been remarkably resilient through two crises, COVID and then the invasion of Ukraine. There's no magic bullets here, unfortunately. There are some opportunities for improvement, and I liked Fabian's characterization of an incomplete market to be completed from earlier. But we have to be clear, the temporary interventions have to go. The Commissioner said something that really worried me earlier, because she said that the temporary interventions were complementary with a long-term framework. She's wrong. They're not. We have to get rid of the temporary stuff and move forward, and we do need a Europe-wide approach. Now, that doesn't mean no specificities. I can't say that word.
Tricky word, isn't it?
That doesn't mean we can't reflect the national circumstances, but we need to start from the premise that things are European, and that means we need a European champion, which is Kristian and ACER and the European Commission as well. And look, the challenge here is massive. My daughter's 1 tomorrow. Happy birthday, Gabs. But look, we keep talking about the energy crisis as what's happened in the last 18 months. Maybe the energy crisis is actually the decarbonization one we've got to fix over the next decade. And that's so big, and I do keep worrying we lose sight of how large that is.
Okay, duly noted. Can we have a round of applause for our panel, ladies and gentlemen, just to bring things together? I think at this stage, I'm going to ask you politely for about another 7 or 8 minutes of your time when I bring up Kristian, just to bring things together and wrap things up so we can send you away. So could we welcome Kristian with a round of applause, please?
Thank you very much. Well, are you going to interview me?
I am going to interview you. I've got 2 questions for you. My first question is, what are the big standout things you've heard today that may align with or partially align with what we know as Eurelectric's position of glass half full and ways to fill it? We've heard from the report. So what are your big standouts?
Before I answer, can I suggest an amendment to this format, which would be that you interview me and I interview someone else, a special guest. Would that be all right with you?
That works for me. Bring them up. Who is it?
Yeah. So can I get a round of applause, please, for our special guest, which is Morten Helvig Petersen, Vice Chair of the ITRA Committee.
Oh.
Yay! So I'm now happy to answer your question, and then I'll pose one to Morten.
So I'll give you the question, and then we'll have his reflections on your answer.
All right.
So for clarity, I'll repeat the question then. What are your big standouts and points you've noted from today's discussions?
Well, first of all, let me say, I've been toying around with that metaphor with the drink, so thank you for building so, let's say, creatively on that. First off, I just love to pick up a good number from a conference, and the 439, that's going to stick with me. 439 policy interventions in the single market, that's pretty amazing. Coming back to the drink analogy, the glass is 80% full for Walburga, that's great. Sonya wanted another drink. I love that. And Guillaume, I think we need to take note of this. He lost a few friends to go and drink with. That means there's still something we need to fix here. Now, I would like to come back to the point I made in the beginning of this conference. We've heard about the long-term instruments, and what this is really about is to get that mix right. A good drink is mixed in the right way. You don't put tomato juice in a gin and tonic, and that's why, when in doubt, leave it out. And I really want to stick to that point. Also at a point in time where we really don't have a lot of time left to make this happen. When in doubt, leave it out. We don't need any wrong ingredients in the mix. We have a strong pressure to deliver great drinks.
I'm with you. So we need to go with what we feel or we can show will work. And some of the things we've heard about that are potentially more problematic without the full impact assessment in place due to time constraints, we should think about bringing them on board at a slightly later date when we've got more certainty about them then, basically.
Absolutely, and that's the point about potentially having another drink later.
Exactly. Well, I'll pass that one on to you then. And what are your reflections on that?
I cannot get this drink metaphor out of my head now. It's too late.
It's powerful, isn't it?
It is very powerful indeed. So, well, first of all, thank you for this great event. A lot of really many good points made. Just clearly showing the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us, and from policy perspective or a political perspective. Bear in mind that we have 7 elections all over Europe this year, 7 elections. And in each and every election, cost of living, thereby energy prices, are front, left, and center of all the debates. So I'm just saying that these are the real sensitivities in the political systems out there. At the start of the crisis, we were really worried that you'd see people demonstrating in the streets all over Europe, basically burning their energy bills. I mean, this was the background a year ago. I think there's a lot of merit in saying that we have come through, by no means perfectly, but bearing in mind where we were like 12 months ago, I think there's a lot of good stuff to build on. Now, for this upcoming exercise, and the timeline is going to be absolutely crazy if we are to adopt this over the next, say, half a year or end of 23. I had the privilege of negotiating the market design in the previous mandate. It took us like 3 years or so. Now we're going to do it in what, 6-9 months, whatever. So, I mean, we need input from you guys. We need input from stakeholders, not least due to the fact that in terms of absence of an impact assessment, from a policy perspective, we really need input on, are we getting this right? Because at the end of the day, striking the right balance between letting markets work and the merit order has served us well in so many ways, not least in terms of integration of renewables. So we should build on this, and we should ensure stability and predictability for investors, also coming back to many of the points made today. Yeah. So this is going to be really tricky, and we need input on this.
Noted. And I'll pin you down, if you'll allow me. Kristian also mentioned this idea, if in doubt, leave it out. You know, with this mindset of the quick is really often in policy making, I think you'll agree, the enemy of the good. What's your specific reflection on that?
So, I'm a politician. I mean, we want to do stuff,
right? I say
right?
it to you,
so,
very cognizant of the fact that you are, my dear sir.
No, but I think there's an extremely important point made in the previous panel on let's not forget what we already agreed upon doing in the clean energy package. I mean, we have so much stuff still to do in terms of implementing policies already agreed upon, which from a political point of view or a politician's point of view is so boring. I mean, the word implementation, you know, you're never going to win an election on saying implementation. I mean, that is impossible. But let's bear this in mind. We have to implement what we already agreed upon. Can I just add one more point on the timing issues? I'm worried about what's going to happen in 2023 and 24. Because while we are negotiating all this stuff, which will then have to enter into force, being a directive down the road in member states, what happens when we see that there is more or less a standstill in terms of deployment of renewables in many countries all over Europe? Would this lead to a call for some sort of an interim measure in order to ensure that we ramp up also this year and next year? I think that's a very important question to at least reflect upon, so things are not standing still in the meantime while we be negotiating.
Yeah. Policy response number 440 to the internal market, yeah.
Quite plausibly.
Yeah.
Right, looking at the clock, looking at our room, looking at what we've already managed to do today, any last comments from you? Or could I rephrase that? What's your takeaway comment for the room?
My takeaway comment is that you must be terribly thirsty, so I'm glad to announce, and this is a coincidence, that we actually have cocktails outside. So can I just say,
no, it's not.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.